This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is Rochelle, Development Director at the NBDA. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Dirk Sorenson from NPD. We're really excited to have him join us and share some trends with us. So take it away, Dirk.
Thank you very much for having me. What I wanted to cover today is, I think it's a bit timely, is look at some macro trends that we're seeing here in the beginning of the fourth quarter. Talk very specifically about kids bikes to provide you with some basic holiday predictions around what we believe we're going to be seeing at the NPD group going into the holiday season, and how to leverage all of this to have a really great holiday selling season. Maybe. Hold on a moment. Okay, so NPD, as most of you are aware of, we track 20 industries with about basically three major means. So the first is point of sale. That's what many of you're familiar with when you work with us in the capacity of bicycle retailer. We also track receipts directly from consumers, and we also conduct surveying to about 12 million consumers. All of this really gives us a pretty good understanding of what's happening in about $2 trillion worth of spend in the United States. Additionally, we operate in 19 other countries, usually tracking kind of larger format products, shoes, apparel, that kind of stuff. But we do have something called the Global Sports Estimate, which gives us secondary research and understanding of what's happening in the bicycle market across those 19 countries. As was mentioned, I'm Dirk Sorenson. I've been kind of hanging around the bike industry and the outdoor equipment space for around 20 years, mostly as a product manager and market researcher. I love mountain biking and whitewater kayaking. As mentioned previously, I have the dubious honor of finishing last in the Leadville 100, so I know suffering and know what it means to sit at the back of a pack. So for today, what I wanted to do is really talk about what we're seeing in the macroeconomics of the United States right now. I think it does warrant review when we think about where bicycles sit in the larger economy. Then I want to get into kids' bicycles and then give you a few basic holiday predictions and then open it up for some questions. So as I mentioned, NPD tracks about $2 trillion worth of spend, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of these major channels to talk about what we're seeing, but I do want you to point out a couple things that I think are worth talking about. The first is media, entertainment, and video games. You can see that those are the highest growth categories that NPD is presently tracking. And, really what I think it amounts to is that there's a theme right now in the United States that really puts a lot of value on and consumerism around categories that are either electronic or kind of enable living at home in a really, really good way. So we'll get to this in a moment, but some of the other bigger growing trends that we're seeing is food delivery service. And we're really well aware of, though we don't track it right now, home improvement doing quite well. So really what we're seeing is that there's a trend right now in the United States of kind of home dwelling. That doesn't mean that the sky is falling for activity-based types of categories, but it is something to be aware of. At the other end of the kind of spectrum, and I do think this is very, very important and important for our conversations today about children's bikes, you can see that both toys and juvenile are, about a $35 billion business when you add the two together, and both in decline. Most of this is occurring really because of channel disruption from last year. So as many of you are aware of, Toys R Us closed closed their doors, and consumers have had a really challenging time readjusting to this kind of new normal where toys aren't just purchased at Toys R Us any longer, and that new channels need to be investigated and and looked at. Additionally, what happened last year is that some of those toys that were at Toys R Us ended up out into the marketplace being bought through auction at a lower price and really bringing the categories down. Now, what that might mean for bikes, we'll get into in a few minutes, but I think in terms of what we do as independent bicycle dealers, the biggest thing that I can recommend to you is make sure that your community knows that you're there and able to sell and service bicycle sales. What we find often with closures, whether this is Toys R Us or Sports Authority, is that consumers really don't have a good grounding on what to do next when a major retailer goes out of business. So it really behooves us all to really put some extra time into telling our own story as independent retailers. So retail growth in the United States, what we're seeing is we're really in a 2% world. This graph, a lot of people take it to mean that the categories or sales are slowing or in decline. That's not really what's happening. What we're seeing is a 2% year-over-year growth rate, and it's really been stabilized since the first quarter of this year. I think what's really profound and important to understand when we look at the online market now is that these growth rates also are kind of sitting in at the 8% range when you take the market and you look at it without food. The biggest growing category online right now is food. Online food deliveries like DoorDash, Uber Eats, that kind of thing. That's really, really driving online growth right now. In terms of top categories, I think this is really helpful as we think about the holiday season, what's growing, what's not. What you're going to see here are some themes. The first big theme is products that really are designed or consumed by people that are traveling a lot, like stereo headphones, e-readers. Those things are growing really, really quite well. The second big growing category is athleisure. So you can see, third and fourth down, sweatshirts, running inspired shoes, basketball inspired shoes, all doing quite well here in the last year. What does it mean? It really kind of the two big themes are that people love travel, first of all, and I think that's a theme that you can use in your holiday sales. And then secondly, really this idea of utilitarianism. A lot of people don't really know what to make of athleisure, but to me, what it really represents is this ability to wear the same clothes everywhere, from work to evening to home, all in one fell swoop. I think this is a macro trend that we all have to think about, especially when we're thinking about bicycle sales. What allows somebody to ride a bike everywhere and do everything? And I think that was driving a lot of what was going on with mountain bikes, but now we're starting to see that with e-bikes. We're seeing that with gravel bikes. So something to think about as we move forward. In terms of top decliners, really no surprises here. Anything that isn't athleisure is in steep decline. So total knit shirts, which is, that kind of classic collared shirt, really in heavy decline. The other stuff that is really in decline right now, if you look through this, are technologies which really are now kind of either fully saturated in the market, like LCD TVs, or really are being replaced by kind of digital alternatives. So what we're seeing now is, for example, some of the game hardware streaming services are eating into video games. That doesn't mean people aren't still playing video games. They're just playing them in a different way. They're maybe not using a console. I would expect over the holiday season to see a little bit of a reversal with video game hardware, just because the marketplace is starting to see new products coming into the marketplace. So a lot of people ask us a little bit about what's happening in e-com. They're very concerned about it. And what you're seeing here is, by and large, many of the categories are slowly growing. I'll leave it at that, but I do think what's important is that if you look at the footwear category, you see it kind of stabilizing it at flat. And what we believe at NPD Group is that every category is going to hit a saturation point around 29-30%, where basically consumers are used to having an online alternative, but they prefer to still have brick and mortar alternatives in their shopping mix. There has been some speculation that all brick and mortar will, cease because of e-com. We firmly believe at NPD that that is not the case, that this is just an alternative channel that is in the mix of consumers' awareness. Now you can see over on the right, technology and media entertainment, very, very highly saturated categories that kind of make sense just based on the categories they are and the mechanism by delivery. So media entertainment is only going to continue to grow as people continue to stream those services. So let's talk a little bit about children's bicycles. The overall market, as you can see here, children's bikes represent the second largest overall category in bicycle sales. So this is across both rest of market, which would be retailers like Amazon, Walmart, Target, REI, Dick's, and inclusive of the IBD. And you can see it's 22% of all dollar sales across all bicycles, and it grew slightly last year. Most of that growth is really due to price increases, not unit increases. So if I did the same graph, you'd probably see a percentage change of 6 to 7% down in children's bicycles across both channels. So a pretty rough year with kids' bike sales in the last year. Some of that has to do with price sensitivity going in from last year, where we had some tariff impact and price increases on kids' bicycles. Not to be ignored are some of the other trends. You can see e-bikes really still kind of gaining percentage and point changes as a category, and now very, very robust, fifth largest category across what we're tracking now, excuse me. Children's bikes in context for the IBD. Now you can see that children's bikes are really, the fourth largest category, really about 11% of all dollar sales happening in the IBD. The category did expand very slightly last year, again, due to price increases. But now I think where it gets interesting is really to dig in now to the individual subclasses of kids' bikes to look for opportunities. And what you can see here is that the IBD really thrives on 20-inch and 24-inch bicycles. They represent about $95 million worth of sales a year for the IBD and just those wheel sizes. But I really think where the opportunity exists for the IBD is looking at the market size of rest of market, which isn't on this graph. You'll notice that if you were to look outside of the IBD, the 16-inch wheel market is $170 million, and it happened to grow about 7% last year. So I think what this is an encouragement is that moms and dads, especially right now, there is an age cohort in terms of millennials that are now having children that are now at the age to ride bicycles. They happen to be a little bit younger, that 16-inch and smaller, maybe even 18-inch bicycles are being consumed by that age cohort for their children. And I really think there's a big opportunity for us to secure a lifetime consumer by getting kids and moms and dads to come to the IBD for those bicycles and not wait until, that 20-inch sale occurs when that kid's, 9, 10, 11 years old. So a real big encouragement when you look outside the IBD to look at new wheel sizes and really that 16-inch wheel size across the IBD and rest of market grew the most by 7% last year. So another thing that really comes out of the data when we look at it really carefully is that the holiday season last year really started about a month earlier. So it started in November. This really shouldn't surprise anybody at NPD because we're seeing earlier holiday starts. Most of you, if you're kind of walking retail these days, are, for me, given my, my age, I would say it's somewhat surprising to see Christmas basically be assorted at mass retail basically the day after Halloween. And I do think that consumers are shopping earlier and earlier for their holiday purchases. There are a lot of larger consumer trends that invite this to happen. You know, it used to be Black Friday, but now you have Cyber Monday. You have everybody trying to beat, all the retailers trying to beat each other for open to buy dollars. I wish I could encourage you to, stand pat, but I do think it's wise to be thinking about how do you secure consumers as soon as you possibly can during this holiday selling season. So the top 5 brands, this is a report for the top 5 brands for the last 12 months. Given that you guys are all in the bite, mostly reporting retailers, I felt like talking about brand behavior would be valuable. As a reporting retailer, if you're not, this is the kind of data that you get directly from NPD Group as a reporting retailer. You can see that Trek and Specialized are the number 1 and 2 IBD brands for children's bicycles. Giant number 3 had a little bit of a disruption last year, and Haro and Cannondale really gaining a fair amount of percentage growth in the last 12 months. Any of these 5 do a great job. My expectation is that all 5 of these brands will have strong year-over-year growth gains now that most of the supply chain disruption caused by tariff discussion last year has been settled. So what are my holiday predictions that are very specific to bicycles? First, in aggregate, what I expect to see is aggressive discounting across retail in the United States. It is kind of the new normal for everybody to try to beat the next guy in terms of retailers for launching a sale. So I expect you're going to see some pretty deep and aggressive discounting. I believe that there's a pretty strong emphasis on technology. You can kind of see this playing out in the headphone markets with Apple releasing yet another version of their AirPod. That kind of thing is really going to happen. Underneath that, I think consumers really, really do have a strong desire for utility, and that's what's driving the athleisure market. I expect that you're going to see a lot of consumers, whether they're shopping for kids' bikes or adult bikes, walking into your shop, looking for that sense of utility. How does a child grow with a bicycle? How do you address a kid rapidly kind of growing out of one bike and into the next? What are the answers there? I think those are the things that consumers are going to be asking you how to address. So be prepared for those types of questions. Smart trainers, we saw this very strong trend last year as one of the top growing categories in the IBD outside of bicycles. I expect that that's going to happen again this year. I wrote here, compete with Peloton. I think we all have an opportunity to tell a better story than what Peloton is telling. I would think about that and articulate it in a really, really clean way, why a consumer may want to use a smart trainer with a bicycle, potentially linking into a training program or Zwift or something like that. I think there's a real opportunity to talk to people that are walking in your shop why they should not do Peloton and should purchase smart trainers. Kids bicycles, one thing I would warn you about is in September we saw a rather large price increase for kids bicycles. My expectation is that some of that may be done early by mass retailers so that they can discount during the holiday window. So be prepared for deep discounting on bicycles as we go into the holiday selling season. Electronics, I think there are more options than ever to provide a small but cool gift in the electronics category for that already committed cyclist. I think this is a theme that we've seen year over year, but now there are new options and new opportunities to bring in new brands whether that's for a new head unit, new lights, power meters, all of that kind of stuff, I think really could be a really great option for us to think about. And then I think the last thing that we've really been seeing is that baby boomers, now that they're kind of retired and have high levels of disposable income, really are challenged increasingly to find yet new things to purchase with all of their all of their accumulated dollars. I think there's a real opportunity here for Southern state retailers to really push hard on e-bikes. So if you're in Arizona or Florida or other, maybe Texas, with large retiree populations, it may really be smart and wise to come up with almost a retirement community strategy to tell the e-bike story. So with that, I wanted to kind of open the floor for any questions that you all might have of me about what we're seeing here at NPD. And really invite you, if you're not a reporting retailer, to join us now. We have all of the graphs that you saw were created by me in less than 30 seconds using a new data mining tool that we have. It is very easy to understand and gives you brand and item level access as well as category level access. So you can individually research every category on your floor and come up with your own kind of thoughts and recommendations as you run your shops. And with that, any questions that you might have, I'm happy to answer.
You can unmute yourselves to ask a question, or there's a chat box in the sort of bottom of the GoToMeeting.
Okay.
Dirk,
Not
Brandy
a
here.
question, but Kent says thanks.
Dirk, Brandy here. I was wondering, are you seeing like a pickup of the brands that have bikes, like the Stranger Things style?
Yeah, licensing is a really interesting phenomenon right now. Most of the licensing product that you see, like Frozen 2 bikes, Stranger Things bicycles, a lot of that happens in the, outside of the independent bicycle dealer. What we think is happening is that there are really strong sales, and we know this to be true. There are strong sales for those licensed bicycles, and I really expect kind of unequaled sales of like Frozen bicycles this year, just because there's so much emphasis on the movie. But what we're seeing in aggregate is less licensed bicycles in the market. And the reason is that the brands that really specialize in licensed bicycles were faced with essentially a margin squeeze. They had to deliver these bicycles to mass retailers at kind of the price established in previous years. And one of the few levers that was left to reduce cost was to, be more thoughtful about the licensed bikes that they put on the floor. So my expectation is that the percentage of licensed bikes sold is going to go down this year, though the properties that are out there are going to do really, really well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. I was curious about that. And then I was also curious about kind of the bringing back of the retro BMX style to more of a comfort bike that a kid could ride for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation, Brandy, which is, the BMX style offers a little bit more flexibility to grow into the bike over time. I think there's a couple things that are happening around BMX, which is really cool. One of the things we're seeing is that BMX itself is a little less price sensitive than traditional children's bicycles. We're seeing very large average selling price increases across BMX, but the consumers that seek them out are willing to pay for them. So what I think is happening there is moms and dads that are buying bicycles for their kids right now happen to probably be more like millennials, and think pretty fondly upon the bikes that they had when they were kids. And then smarter retailers have that ability, I think, to talk about the flexibility of a BMX bike to grow with a child. So I think those two things really kind of point to a pretty strong, strong growth. And as a matter of fact, the brands, if you remember on the brand slide, one of those brands happens to be Haro, a kind of a stalwart brand in the world of BMX. I think they branched out a bit, but also the brand is coming back in the eyes of consumers. You can also see this in that kind of East Coast cruiser, PT cruiser type of market as well. So very good probable market for BMX. Do I think it's going to be gangbusters? No, I don't. But I also don't think that consumer is price sensitive. So something that you can bring in and make, good money on.
So this past year at Frostbike, Rich Towers said that QBP, they noticed that the BMX trend goes in 3-year cycles. And he said we're in the first year of like the 3-year trend or whatever. Do you see that happening too overall at NPD?
It's really hard for me to comment on the cycles. Like, I personally kind of believe it based on other categories outside bike. We see it in outdoor, but the cycle length is longer. They're usually 5 or 6 years, not 1 or 2 to 3 years. I think when it comes to kids' bicycles, what may be driving that cycling, the behavior of the not cycle like in what we're talking about, but in terms of time series cycles, has to do with how many times that bike can be resold or shared or reused by families and so forth. 3-4 years on a kid's bike is a pretty lengthy time. And then, you're dealing with maintenance issues and that sort of stuff. So that might be what's driving that cycling behavior on kids' bicycles and BMX.
All right, great. I think that's all we have.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate taking the time with you guys today, and look forward to speaking with you in the coming month or months about new trends. As the year turns over, we'll probably do a pretty deep dive into all the things that we're seeing across cycling that happened in 2019. And I thank all of you for your time. And again, encourage you, if you're not a panel member, to join us here at NPD Group. Thank you very much.